cross-lag panel model. That's today's topic. What is it? Before introducing the model itself, I would like you to reflect about different types of relationships that we can have among the same variables. For example, what if I ask you, what is the relationship between these two variables where x is typing speed and y is proportion of typos that you make? There are three possible relationships. Either they are positively related, or they are negatively related, or they are unrelated. Who says negatively related, raise your hand. Who say positively related?
No, it's positive.
Okay. Negatively? Positively? Raise your hand proudly, like this. And who says they're not related? Okay. And positively related? Negatively? And not related. Okay. So, and many of you are undecided. So, who says positively? Why? No, nobody says positively. Who says negatively related? Why are they negatively related?
At the beginning, it was the idea that something is positive and something is negative, and was without thinking too much. Yeah.
Right. So
from my side.
it's okay. It's okay. The trick, the correct answer, I'd say, is all three of them. They are positively, negatively, and unrelated if you observe them across different people and over time. At the between person level, they are negatively related. So people who typically type faster, for example you, young scientists, they make fewer typos than people who type slow, like your grandparents, who also make more typos. That's ability. That's an ability trait. At the within person, contemporaneous level, so when you are typing faster than your typical level, you make more typos. So if I ask you, copy this slide in 2 minutes, you type faster than you typically do, but you make more typos. At the within person, cross-lag level, they are not related. So if you type faster now, it doesn't affect how many errors you will make in 3 hours. It's just not related. So the point is, you can have, we typically used to think that for two variables, there is one type of relationship. But there can be many types of relationship, and they can all be true and meaningful. I mean, one could wonder, okay, but what is the true causal relationship between writing speed and typing ability? Well, all of them are true, and are also causal. I mean, causal because if you imagine, I know people who say the true relationship is within the person, because within the person level is the level at which psychological phenomena take place. Yes, it's true that within person level you could manipulate it. I can make you type faster than you usually make you make more mistakes, or slower, like with more attention, and reduce the number of mistakes. But I could also manipulate, in principle, the between person level. I could train you. I could take grandparents around the table and train them to type faster. And I expect that this training, like prolonged training that will change the rank order, will also affect, as a consequence, the percent of typos they make when they type at the comfort level, comfort speed. And also, if I manipulate this at the within person level, I don't expect any effect on the cross lines. Yes?
Can I give an example that might be more familiar to people?
Yeah.
So people can predict, and they are aware of their implicit bias. They can predict their score on an IIT. But this is true only for within-person correlations. So people can predict that they are very negative towards, I don't know, Italian cheese or something like that, and very positive towards Belgian beer. So they can predict their relatives, but they cannot, they're bad in predicting how they are marked towards other people, in relation to other people. So they cannot say, I am very, my preference for relativity is very high because that requires a comparison. So there too you have within person level correlations, but not between.
So you mean in this time it's not across different times, but across different topics?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Absolutely. So of course, I mean, we have our example is with persons times, but if you have person times and topics, then you can have a whole bunch of different relationships also across this other dimension. So you can even have more complex types of relationship. But I think for today we'll stick with the persons and times. And because it's typically the way in which the random intercept cross-like panel model is used. And then I think that this, I gave you already a good reason to collect longitudinal data. Juliette gave many others yesterday. But if you don't have longitudinal data, you cannot have access to, you cannot distinguish these types of relationships. So some people are used to make experiments using random assignment for establishing an effect of X on Y. And that the effect is causal. Okay, I think this slide is one of the motivating reasons for the cross-like panel model, which is the antecedent of the random intercept cross-like panel model by Kenny. And here is a clickable paper in which they make this point. But the problem is sometimes you cannot do experiments, and longitudinal data allow you to at least disentangle obtain at least the temporal relationship between variables. So that, for example, increase in X predicts an increase in Y over time and not the other way around. If you have collected two variables, X and Y, and you want to see whether one actually, yes, causally affects the other over time, what could you do? You could just do a correlation. You take X at time 1, Y at time 2, you correlate them. And you say, okay, this at least it should be better than having a cross-sectional correlation between X and Y. And the reason is that you may think that you can exclude a confounder between X and Y happening at time X. But what you may not be able to exclude, I will take the whiteboard. It's because I have whiteboards. So you take X at time t and Y is time t plus 1, Y at time t. Okay. If you want to, you're interested in a causal relationship between X and Y. What if you take this correlation? You say, okay, they are correlated, they are probably causally related. The problem is you cannot exclude an effect of a third variable, Z. You cannot exclude that actually Y is causally affecting X. So you say, okay, I will measure X at time t plus 1. What I measure is a regression in which this is predicted by X. And now I'm fine, right? Not much. If you assume that there is some stability in Y. So if Y tends to be stable over time, then you have still the same starting point. So this relationship between X and Y can just be reflect a spurious correlation because of this counterpart. So what could you do? Well, you check whether X predicts Y after controlling for the autoregressive effect of X. And this is one you don't know whether it exists or not, you just have a correlation here. And then this should be more informative. What you also do is you predict, this one is X, you predict X from Y, controlling for the autoregressive effect of X. If you do this, you have a cross-like panel model. Panel because you have panel data. longitudinal data in which everything is sampled as at regular intervals. You can have t plus 2 and have x and y, and again do the same, etc. etc. Okay.
So, Giulio,
Yeah.
do you need many observations at each time, or you are happy with one observation at each time?
You are happy with one, but you can have many if you want to.
You can, but one is enough for us to make sure.
You don't need, I mean, you could have, but that's an extension, it's more complicated. But if, of course, could assess X with many items, for example, it's not necessary.
Okay, it's not necessary.
Okay, and then this part, is
It's not necessarily technically, conceptually. What are you doing? You are predicting one item, affecting other, not those.
A different measure where you may have like performance measures that you take in one.
Yeah, technically you can. It's also to be seen what the conceptually makes sense.
But technically you don't need many measures
I mean,
to estimate it.
I explained, it's not unnecessary in the sense that conceptually unnecessary. It's not necessary to explain the model or to fit the model. You could imagine this as latent variables measured by different items. And it's the same, it doesn't change anything. Okay. But the point that Kenny makes, this model was actually introduced before Kenny, but then Kenny popularized in 1935 in a paper in which it says, okay, if you compare this path, y predicting x over time, and this path, x predicting y over time, you can have an idea of the causal dominance of x and y. So, for example, if x predicts y over time and y doesn't predict x over time, you make a point that there is a causal dominance of x and y. Of course, I see Marco. I see Marco. I knew that when I say causal, they do trigger things.
One thing and another thing before, assume equal or symmetrical reliability. You can have an effect just due to asymmetrical reliability, which goes back to your point. If you have a single item, you don't know the reliability. If you have multiple items, they have asymmetric differential reliability, you can have a stronger effect from one to the other due to different measurement techniques. Can have one transmission, I mean, but it's a consequence of attenuation from measurement technique. So if it's the reliability constant is the same, then dominance over the one on the other depends on the strength of the range. But if it's not the same, can depend simply from the differential.
Yeah, that's not only, it's depending on all correlation problematic it's not only, it's also the range, it is the range restriction to one variable and the other one is...
You can have all sorts of problems here.
Yeah, so...
I mean, when they say causal, sometimes they say, for example, animal market, they say, okay, I mean Granger causal. And that actually Granger causality means prediction over time. Yeah? So, it's the other reason is you could have a confound with z, with acts like this. It affects x and y at different times. For example, imagine that x is sneezing and y is pneumonia. And you feed this model and you observe that sneezing predicts subsequent pneumonia, but pneumonia doesn't predict subsequent sneezing. Do you conclude that sneezing is a cause of pneumonia? Probably COVID. Yeah.
So if I think of it in terms, so this is still statistics trying to capture causal power, causality as some kind of influence, right? Whereas functional causation simply means why wouldn't that happen without the presence of x? So y is a function of x. So that's functional causality. And that's, I think, also where Pearl in his book, what's it called again, Marco? The error of causality or something like that. I think that's the jump he makes. He makes from causal power to to functional causality. Then you are not caught in these stories anymore of capturing causal power. Because then the real thing is manipulating.
Exactly, but if you manipulate sneezing, you don't solve. I mean, if you manipulate sneezing, you still get pneumonia. Problem. If you have, I mean, if you have COVID, even if you manipulate sneezing, you get pneumonia afterwards.
Not if you manipulate sneezing by a feather, for example.
Okay, I think we okay, let's do this. I know that causality is connected to our feelings. So I'd say for the moment, I just had this discussion on causality because that's why this whole idea became popular. But I don't think that this gives you access to causal processes in the sense of what would happen, and counterfactual causal problem. What would happen if you manipulate this?
It's perhaps an even softer way to say it, which is set and correct. It's a functional relation.
Okay.
No one can say anything. You don't have to say, faccio doesn't mean così. Giulio to another that is possible. You say functional relation in the sense of A values as a function, whether this is a cause. If you say function, temporal functional relation.
Temporal functional relationship is okay. I can live with it. Yeah, sure.
Just related to the same question. Is there, so like, you know how if you have some models in the conditional confounder, you can actually open up undesired causal pathways because of additional confounding variables. I don't know, you know, like DAG stuff, like Richard Nepel-Reed's.
Which one?
Richard Nepel-Reed's like statistical rethinking. He's got these DAGs and like how she's showing basically how like if you condition on confounders, sometimes it's appropriate, other times it's not, and it opens up new causal pathways you don't want to model.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Does this approach avoid that? Like, does using a cross-like approach actually reduce the impact of undesireds?
I need to think about it. I mean, what happens is, I'm not sure that the people you mentioned, I don't have the papers, like Pearl and one on the European Journal of Personality, and the idea is that if you have a causal structure that is like in this form, X, Y, and Z, and these two are unrelated, and you control for Z, statistically control for Z, you induce an artificially negative relationship between X and Y. So, how would you apply it here? If X and Y are both causally related, for example, on Y, at time plus 1, and you control, now we don't do that. I don't think it's a problem. Because you don't, or maybe, I have to think about it.
Yeah, I suppose what I'm asking is just like, is there a benefit of using this approach rather than like modal, say, confounding control? Like, does it avoid some of those issues, or is it also subject to it?
I think it's, I'm not sure because, I mean, I picture Z, but this one is unobserved. You don't see this, you have no idea what this is. So, but you can, of course, model additional variables in the same way, like you could have unobserved Z, and then have these, and all the other values here. That you can do. And then if you are saying, what if X and Y equals Z? Well, no, I don't think it's a problem because also X and Y, I don't know, it's a really difficult question to think about it in these terms because then you have that they are lagged. So they're not the same exact variables anymore. They're also same thing on different times. Not sure. Not sure. Okay, so this thing is the cross-lag panel model. You can do something more than what I pictured here. So you have within person autoregressive effects. This tells you the extent to which X predicts itself at a subsequent point in time. And Y the same, and Z the same. Then you have within person, and this is if this is Typewriting speed and number of errors. This, or I don't know, the example I use here is anxiety and condition. Giulia, easy effect. Anxiety and easy effect. This tells you how stable anxiety is over time. We'll discuss about it more. Right? Because anxiety is assumed to be stable because current anxiety is affected by previous anxiety plus some innovation, some error. You can imagine this as anything that happens in your life and that makes you more or less anxious, and this as what will happen if everything will stay the same. So you are anxious, and the idea here is you stay anxious until something happens internally or externally and shifts your anxiety up or down. And then, according to how strong this is, you can have more stability or more instability. This is within subject autoregressive effects. This is cross-lagged effects, meaning that your current, your current EC effect, the current EC effect is the power of the current EC effect is predicted by the previous anxiety, for example, and controlling for the stability of this effect. But you can also have contemporaneous effects. So, for example, you have this innovation in EC effect, this innovation in anxiety, and they can also be correlated. Meaning that whatever happens in a certain time and affects your anxiety, to some extent also affects your EC effect at the same time. In the case of typing speed and writing ability, this could be a manipulation, for example, or the need to type faster because you have an exam, or type slower because you are calm and tranquil and calm. And this is somehow related because it affects typing speed and number of typos in the same moment. And this is within person contemporaneous effects. Is anything missing here?
So E1, E4, E2, E5, and E3, and E6 are within person.
Exactly. These are cross-line. These are autoregressive effects, and these are cross-line. Technically, this one is also a contemporaneous effect, but it's typically less interesting because these ones are estimated after controlling for autoregressive and cross-lag effect. So after controlling for the portion of contemporaneous relationship that you could account for at a previous time point. So this is more informative if you consider, as I do, lagged effects as more important because they allow to predict something before it happens. Whereas contemporaneous effects don't. They allow to predict something as it happens. What is missing here?
Relationship between the errors across them.
No, but the innovations are assumed to be uncorrelated because otherwise they would. I mean, if they were correlated, I think that would be accounted for by autoregressive networks.
And it's 2 and Y2 and 3Y and X or
Oh, they are correlated to the errors. No, something else. We say there are 3 types of relationships. The between subject. Where is the between subject here? Nowhere. We'll get back to that in a moment. But, okay, if you want to fit this type of model, which is, you need at least 2 waves. You can already fit it with only 2 waves, but it's just identified model. You don't have any degrees of freedom, so you don't get big indices and all. You can do that, you can fit this model with structural equation modeling software. You can use Laban, and Plus, Distre, whatever you want. You have all the assumptions of the general linear model, of course, because these are regression and correlation, etc. So if they have, I don't know, relationship is quadratic or polynomial, etc., this is just linear. Then you assume synchronicity. This one is important with respect to what Juliette said yesterday. Synchronicity means that you assume that at each time point, x, y, z, all the variables are assessed at the same time. Why? Because if you actually assess, for example, in a retrospective report, you ask to every person, how anxious were you today, and with respect to the whole day, and how conditioning is not very good because it happens at a certain time point, but I don't know how depressed you were today, in the whole day. It could as well happen that anxiety predicts depression. You were anxious at 2 p.m. and depressed at 9 p.m. And this will show up as a contemporaneous relationship, and not as a cross-line relationship, even though it's really a cross-line. This is not a big problem, exactly because this type of relationship then, I mean, you cannot in psychology have perfect synchronicity. So you always have some retrospective report of X and Y, or maybe you don't know exactly when anxiety began and when depression began, etc. And when it ends. Then these things, when you don't have the perfect timing, they show up as contemporaneous effects. And stationarity, the phenomenon doesn't change over time. So you assume that the type of, if you have many observations over time, you assume that the underlying causal generating mechanism is the same. If it changes over time, then you cannot model it. But the main issue is how this thing takes into account personality traits. Not personality traits, trait-like variables, or variables that have some trait-like stability over time. The point is, the only path, the only way to take into account stability is the autoregressive paths. What does it mean? What does it imply? It implies that your, I don't know, if this is anxiety, your current anxiety is predicted, let's forget everything else now, but it's mainly predicted, it's predicted by the previous anxiety at the previous time point, plus some innovation. It also means that there is no underlying level of anxiety that distinguishes persons. It's assuming stationarity in this framework means that you assume that the grand mean of anxiety, so our global anxiety, the average of our anxiety across people and across time, is the same over time. Doesn't change. But it doesn't assume that, for example, I'm more anxious than Jamie, and this stays stable. This is not anywhere here. These innovations, no matter how small they accumulate over time. So at some point, any rank order stability between us will be gone. So, yeah, this is not how I think, and also Elena Macker thinks, that traits work.
I think this is testable because it would imply that stability is zero.
Yeah. I mean, it's testable, but it's...
what I mean is testable in the sense that it's incorrect. It's easy to demonstrate that the assumption is incorrect because it would imply that stability in measurement of traits over time tends towards zero as opposed towards zero.
Exactly. Then one, I mean, there is at the end of this presentation, I will just introduce a couple of papers because this is harshly debated right now. So people are really fighting about this, scientifically fighting, but almost personally, I say, about whether the cross-like panel model is a good model or not. But I think, I mean, I don't think that this is necessary to have, I mean, someone is trying to demonstrate, for example, that the cross-like panel model is always useless, is always inferior. But I think in my research, in which personality traits are involved, I think that this is not a plausible mechanism of stability for personality traits. I think a model that doesn't consider rank order stability at all, it's not convincing. And also, how do current reasoning in personality psychology sees stability in traits? Because one would say, okay, you consider personality states, for example, anxiety, okay, it's an emotion, but it's also also a stable component. How is that conceived? And the idea is that we have a stable mean of anxiety around which we have states. And these states vary more or less widely for each of us, but around a level that is more or less stable and is responsible for our rank order stability. So, for example, today I may be less anxious than Jamie. Tomorrow Jamie may be more anxious than, less anxious than me. But then, on average, I'm more anxious and he is less anxious. And these two things are both true. It's like the typing speed and the number of typos. Some people type faster, some people type slower, but then at some moment you can type faster than your usual and less than usual. And this is a different type of stability. How do we account for that? With a random Intercept cross-like panel model. Before we start, I will stick to the whiteboard because I like it a lot. I always wanted to have one in my office, but I forgot how tough it is to cancel things.
When is your birthday?
Daniele actually gave me one, but I use it for other purposes and not for it's my fault. But my question is this. I have variable x at time 1, x2, x3, x4, xn over time. I do this. I take a factor for all these variables observed over time. I constrain the loadings to be 1. What is this for each individual? The stable part. If you need to calculate this with a simple formula, what would the formula be? Let's think of the formula of factor scores. You have r of x is equal to x1 multiplied by the loading of x1. So, in this case 1 plus 1 multiplied by x2 plus 1 multiplied by xn. If you divide it by the number of x's, this is just the mean. I'm doing this because otherwise it may appear complicated. That's this just the mean. Then you can have a unique, let's call it wx1, wx2, wx3. You have again another factor here that is only is the residual of this variable, of each of these variables. What is this thing? It's just the deviation from the mean. So it's the error, the part that you don't predict using this factor. So if your mean level of anxiety is 3, and today you're unsatisfied, this is +2. It's a state. Now, the idea, this model was proposed and introduced by Helena Macker and colleagues in 2015 as an improvement of the cross-like panel model. The paper was entitled A Critique of the Cross-like Panel Model. And that's why I thought it would be good to introduce you to the cross-like panel model before, because it's tightly related. The random intercept cross-like panel model is just a cross-like panel model that has this. This is called a random intercept, because it's a factor but with all weights to 1. And the idea is that you fit the cross-like panel model not directly on these variables, but on those, on the residuals after controlling for the random intercept, so on the states. And then, why would you do that? One is that you have the within-person effects, including autoaggressive, cross-like, and contemporaneous, are estimated separately after removing the between-subject part. What happens in the cross-like panel model if you don't include this? You have imagined that the true causal genetic mechanism has this. So a trait stability that, a stable trait that affects all of your manifestations over time to a certain fixed portion. If you don't account for that, if you don't see this is a confounder that introduces these kind of things. But this is even worse because you have typically 2 variables, x and y, and the same is true for y. You have random intercept of y. What if these 2 are correlated? The stable level of conditioning and of anxiety, they are correlated. You don't see them, they are confounded, and you get this. You get that not controlling for the correlation between subjects introduces cross-like effects, even though they are not genuine. Not genuine because they can be explained by a mechanism that is between subject and not within subject cross-like. So essentially, you have 2 advantages. One, that you estimate within subject effect after controlling for between subject effects. And the other one is you also get between subject effects, because you see this correlation between the random intercept and just the between subject portion. And also, the cross-like panel model is nested under the random intercept cross-like panel model. So for those who are familiar with structural equation modeling, you can test which fits better. So you can have both and see, okay, the random intercept has more parameters. So it's less parsimonious, it's less simple, but could fit the data better anyway. So you can check. Any questions so far?
Well, so if traits, your estimate depends on your measurement. So if you basically take the estimate that you have so far, you can always take another measurement. So if you're testing under special circumstances, so when, for example, during an exam period of students, rather than during the holidays of students, you will attribute the stability, or you will take the mean measurement as your trait. But that could be because you're measuring at a stressful time, and so you overestimate the trait part by putting in variation. So when there is stability in situational factors, you will attribute this to trait factors.
So what they say is that the random intercept is accounting for statistically trait variables. So and what I mean by this is that it's accounting for mean levels during what you observe. It's not necessarily exactly the same as the trait, as an underlying stability that goes on for all of your life. But imagine that, I don't know, I have an external influence, so you are in exam period and I'm not. It's different times of exam in Belgium and Italy. It means that during my data collection, your levels of anxiety are higher than mine. And this is because of an external influence. You can imagine it as the effect of this trait, and not because your anxiety is, our anxieties are connected over time. It's more like a confounder and not a causal connection of your previous anxiety on the current anxiety. You're anxious is high because of a third variable and not because you were anxious yesterday. So it's still a better way to take this kind of phenomena under control.
Not sure I get that.
Oh. Maybe you can.
And here, it's the amazing thing, your parameters are just statistics. And the R is just a mean, but I have a feeling the logic underlying it is still a causal power logic. That you consider R to be something that influences Rx to be something that influences the X's. And yeah, so this is it like implicitly assumes a kind of latent traits idea of traits as latent constructs.
Once again, influence is a function, not necessarily a cause.
Yeah,
I mean, statistics assume statistically that variations in the score are functionally to this congruent. Doesn't mean that they're positive.
No, but it's not a coincidence that he puts arrows on those, like that he puts pointers on those arrows.
Once again, the arrows can be used for functional regression. If you present a graph of a regression, independent variable moves ahead from independent to independent. It doesn't imply that this is possible. You are implying that variations in this code are functionally related to relation in that score. So you change this, you have variations in this, but doesn't imply that it's the cause.
I think it's a better, there is another point in favor of this model, and it's this. You separate. Don't think about, think about it, I mean, in terms of partition variance. You separate the stability portion, which would be due to exams, for example, the stable exam time and non-exam time in Italy. You separate it, you put it like here, from the functional effect that the current anxiety has on anxiety at a subsequent time, point in time. So this is different from this. This could be a trait, could be also exam time, very stable for all the time you observe this. And it's something different from the fact that the current anxiety depends on your anxiety the previous day. That's another different thing.
Yeah. But this doesn't take into account the anxiety trait that you can measure. So this one doesn't happen.
No. I mean, it's a different thing that you administer a scale of anxiety cross-sectionally, for example, and say how anxious are you typically. So this is probably correlated with anxiety. It's not the same as administering question. This is a statistical, yeah. So
it should be correlated.
It typically is.
And this is the same concept. These are technical differences. I don't know exactly precise difference, but the point is, this was in the 90s. The trait state distinction, that was the model, trait state Latin model. It's just a way to separate variation due to something that is very stable versus fluctuating. If you want to make causal assumptions, your additional work, but technically that's it. It's only a definition of surface of value.
I realized that I don't have much time and I'm slide 9, so it's not good. I'll try to rush. But then I think it's more important that you have an idea of what the hell this is. Because if you open a paper, you're not familiar with this, you see this, you close the paper and you do something else. But here now, this can appear complicated, but it's not. Here you have the cross-Lachman model. This is the cross-Lachman model. This is the same thing. But it's fitted on the residuals of a random intercept. So all these arrows now make sense, I think. You have autoregressive, cross-lagged, contemporaneous correlations, between subject correlations. You can make this more complex, like with many more arrows and parameters, if you add 5 variables instead of 2. Can you imagine? I mean, we did it with fluorine, and you have huge amount of arrows, but it's still the same. You have between subject, autoregressive, cross-lagged, contemporaneous. That's it. And these loadings are not very interesting because they're fixed to 1. So just 1, 1, 1, 1, 1.
Can I ask you something?
Sure.
Well, one thing they don't understand in this model is that, according to this model, my anxiety, my change in anxiety today should like predict my change in another variable another day.
It's not actually your change in anxiety.
It's the change from the
baseline level.
From the baseline,
Exactly.
yeah. But why should my change, the fact that today I'm more anxious, predict the fact that tomorrow I'm reacting in a different way to the dependent variable? It's from change to change.
It's from change to change. Okay, because you can imagine a world in which, if nothing happens, you are at your stable level. Then, for some reason, you move from your baseline level of anxiety up or down. And for example, the fact that today you are more anxious predicts your performance at the exam tomorrow, but doesn't predict the fact that you are typically a good student or a bad student compared to other students. It predicts the fact that you are a better student than your typical level.
Yeah, but tomorrow, not today. I mean, my anxiety today should predict.
Your point is, why would a relationship be, how relationship could be over time?
Yeah, they change today, they change tomorrow.
For instance, in the paper we used this model, the management actually, we were thinking about the old egg and chicken thing about self-esteem and depression, for instance. And if you can look at this phenomenon between subjects, so on average, people who are more, who have lower self-esteem are more depressed. But you can also think in terms of this kind of changes. When my self-esteem is lower than my average self-esteem, in a way affects that tomorrow I feel more depressed as symptoms, more depressed symptoms than I usually have. And if it's the other way around, that depression, the way I feel today is more depressed, influences in a way the way I feel about myself tomorrow, it's the other way around in the story. So it's a scar model, vulnerability model, self-esteem induced depression, repeated depression lowers your self-esteem. But so in a way, this kind of question you can put for all phenomena that are addressed in longitudinal way, and you cannot do experiments, but you can still want to get some data on what is the dynamic of these two phenomena, because it doesn't happen as I really love the example from the beginning, that you find that typing typing faster is related to fewer errors, because could be a lot of individual differences there in terms of age, abilities, and so on. But it's also important to see within subjects what happens. And this capture better than.
probably depends on the phenomenon, like the
Yeah.
typing errors probably wouldn't happen if I'm
Yeah.
typing faster today.
But it also depends on the luck. So I say today, tomorrow, but it could be now in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So that's.
Okay, thank you.
So it doesn't mean to be tomorrow.
It's a
time lag, it's dependent on the
Instead of saying tomorrow, I should say at a subsequent point in time. Yes?
Sorry, to answer the point, you mentioned that. Yeah, I mean, it was debated, but wasn't that how you would infer causality? That if, for example, the x's, if you consistently found that, let's say, x predicted y tomorrow, but y today didn't predict x, you could infer causality in one direction or another.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is of course a hint on causality because it's not like you manipulated x. But at least you can have a better sense of what, from functional standpoint, happens. Then you can decide to manipulate it. So you manipulate whatever x is and observe what happens in 10 minutes on y, and you do the reverse.
So to answer the previous question, it might be good that anxiety is not related to something tomorrow, but whatever you're like the test for it is related to anxiety tomorrow, then you could infer some sort of direction.
Exactly. You can assume that you can have a better idea of what's going on at the within subject cross lag level, and then you may think of manipulating it and check whether this is actually the case or not. But this, as all structural equation model, is mainly a predictive model. It's not. I mean, it allows you to have a better sense of what's going on, but it's not necessarily reflecting the causal-generating mechanism. Oh, no, that's why. Okay, so now I have many slides in which I show you how to do this in LEARNVUL. But I will go quickly through those slides because, well, for two reasons. One is that it takes time. So if I had all day, I will have you to program each of the part of the model manually. But I think it's more value if I show you the code and I tell you, okay, this portion of code does this and must be programmed in this way, etc. And also, I mean, I use LEARNVUL because I'm an R user and I don't know even how to open M+, for example, but you can do that in M+, or Lizral or whatever. It's the same once you understand conceptually what you're doing. So, and also, the data in the example are from the website by Mulder and Hamaker. And it's a companion to the paper published in 2021 that proposes several possible extensions of this model. And I strongly advise, of course, to check this website because I use their data and their example. I only do the simplest case, then you can go to their website and continue extending this to more complicated situations. And also, these two papers are the first one you want to read because they are the one who introduced the model and the one that extended it. So, LEARNVUL, very quickly, when you need to declare a model in LEARNVUL, you can use, you need to have a big text. Who of you is familiar with LEARNVUL to begin with? Okay. Very good. Who uses M+? That's good that I did in LEARNVUL then. So LEARNVUL is a free package in R for structural equation models. And you can declare a model with a text file or a text string. In each line, you declare a certain type of relationship, for example, factor loadings, regression, correlation. And there are symbols for doing each of those. For example, equals and then tilde is for factor loadings, tilde is for regressions, double tilde is for covariances. And a fixed number before a variable means that you want to fix a certain variable to a certain level. In our case, we will need to fix many of the loadings to 1. So we will need a factor, for example, random intercept is equal tilde means a factor. 1 multiplied by h1 means that this factor loading is 6 to 1. That's mostly what you need to know. Okay. 4 steps. I should have written 5. Because this one actually was labeled 0. But then it got probably, when rendering the file, it labeled 1. So it should be 0, loading packages, importing data is default step for every in R, and then 4 steps. Yeah. That's it. So you need to import the data and packages, specify the random intercepts, specify the within person, so this part, then the within person variations from the random intercept, then the lag effect, including autoregressive and cross-lagged, and then the covariances. And then a little tiny step again. Okay, this part is just reading, importing 3 packages we will use. Actually 2 packages, this one I didn't use in the end. So Lavan and dplyr because it's convenient for managing data. This code actually is importing the data directly from the GitHub page. So you don't find the data downloaded in the folder. You can just type this and you get the data downloaded from the internet. Data, in the case of the random intercept cross-lifetime model, are in wide format. So you have X at time 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, for subject 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this produces huge files in terms of number of variables if you collect a variable for 20 times, or 10 variables for 20 times you have 2000 columns. It's okay, you can live with that. It's a problem with all the programming part, you need to do a lot of copy pasting. Random intercepts are these. How do we specify them? Like this, very easy. We start, you define this text variable. We call it the model random intercept cross lifetime model is equal to, open inverted commas. Random intercept of x is equal tilde is defining the factor, 1 multiplied by x1, 1 multiplied by x2, blah, blah. Yes?
Hopefully it's easy to answer. Why 1 and not simply fix them to be equal? Why are you fixing them all to be 1?
Because it wouldn't be, I don't think it would be defined.
Yeah.
Because then whatever level you take, maybe the same, but you have another parameter.
I think in Milan you don't specify it and tries to estimate it.
Yeah, it gets estimated, but why would you? Because then.
Because I imagine that it's true that the mean right now you're forcing it to be 1 if it decides its own parameter.
Imagine that this is 2.
Yeah.
So you do this multiplied by 2, this multiplied by 2, and then you add them. You have the same variable, but multiplied by 2 for each time. It's the same multiplied by 2. If you have 3, it's the same multiplied by 2. So it wouldn't be defined. Probably it will tell you that you cannot find a unique solution because any solution you take has the same fit. And that happens because it doesn't matter if they are all equal, which value you pick.
I don't know about I know this. My experience is this usually depends A on the default and B on the kind of wise rule that you skip the default, you just be explicit on what you do. So if you show 1 times, you don't need to remember the default. The default is the programmer idea what happens if you do nothing. Whereas here you do always exactly what you want to do. This way there are no mistakes.
Yeah, in this case I think it will not, I would say that the solution is in, you can try, but I think it's not useful, it doesn't have anything, only frees a parameter that...
Depends on the default of Rossell, what he decided.
But in this case I think it's more conceptual, so the fact that whatever is this value is the same, doesn't change. Right?
Okay.
Yeah. So you pick 1 because it's a simple number. If you, for example, instead of putting a letter or something, you put 10, doesn't change anything, like anything at all. Now, we need to specify this other part, so the residuals. Let's say, but this one we have a specific factor for each variable. So Wx means the within subject part of x, within subject variation from the mean for x. 1, and then you have for all the variables, y, x, and y. So this part is easy. It's something that is not actually estimated because the parameters are there. Now we start with a cross-line panorama, but fitted on these w, x, and wy variables. I only, okay, the color coding I'm using, the blue part is the one that you can forget about. We completed it already. The green ones are those that we need to program. I only circle these two, but this refers to also these, all the equal autoregressive and cross-line relationship in this image. How do you program them? They are actually regressions. So for example, I write, okay, let's go back. wx2 and wy2 tilde, meaning that they are predicted by wx1 and wy1. Then I write wx3 and wy3 predicted by wx2 and wy2. So that's it. And you can write I can write two dependent variables, meaning two separate regressions, actually. This is just a way to write more complex. But you could write like wx2 predicted by these two, and then another line wxy2 predicted by the same two variables. It's the same. Now we need three types of covariances. Those, okay, I'll show you here. The first type is covariances involving the random intercept. So these are between subject correlations, essentially. They reflect, for example, the fact that people who typically type faster also make fewer mistakes. No, sorry. Here. These ones are the contemporaneous correlations after controlling for autoregressive and cross-line parts. They reflect the fact that when someone is typing faster than usual, he or she makes more mistakes than usual at the same time. And this one is just a contemporaneous correlation between these exogenous variables, and it's not typically interesting. I mean, it's not typically interpreted because it's different from this variable, from these correlations, both conceptually and also as a value, typically. So we don't focus very much on it, but we need it. We need to model it. And again, with this one, I already told you, so I won't elaborate again on it, but this only explains why we prefer to focus on these ones than on this one. Now, covariances actually are declared with a double tilde symbol, and you have covariance between the two variables at the first time point, then at the subsequent time point, and between subject correlations between the random intercepts. Yes, including the variances of the random intercepts. Actually, this I didn't tell you, but double tilde with the same variable on the left and on the right hand means a variance. So we model also the variance of this, which will be the only parameter that will change if you put 2 or 3 or 4 here. One last step. This is not conceptually very important, but it's because, in this case, because of the defaults, you need to manually specify the variances of each of these variables. So you need to specify that you want to estimate the variance of wx1, wy1, wx2, wy2, etc. So just include this part. So all these need to have a variance. If you use if you're familiar with Laban, if you use CFA, for instance, they get specified automatically. But then CFA doesn't work yet because there are other defaults that make this model unfittable. So you need to use the function Laban, which is the basic function for this. The argument for fitting is the model, the data, how do we want to treat missing values. In this case, it's full information maximum likely. I don't think it's necessarily in this specific case because it's simulated data actually that we are using. Then mean structure, because you want to model not only the covariance matrix but also the mean levels of the variables. And okay, this one you need to estimate the intercept of the observed values. These are actually the correct defaults that they give you, the correct options that they give you to actually fit the model correctly. Take them as they are. And now, yeah, you should make it to interpret the results. You can get the results, also standardized, and with the fit indices. The first part of the output tells you a recap of the model and the chi-square test. And the chi-square is not significant. Unsurprising because the data were simulated from exactly this model. So it's by design. Then you have fit indices, CFI, RMSA, TLI, etc., which all indicate good fit, again, because this is simulated. Loadings are not very interesting, because they're all one by design. You design them to be one. Both for a random intercept, I guess.
I think it could be useful to explain to those who use the standard to structural model that after they say, well, they're different, they're not one. So why is that?
This here. No, okay. The unstandardized values of the loadings are one. Then you can also weight them for the standard deviations of the variables and have standardized indices, and they can be different from one. What you fix is the unstandardized loading. You can later standardize it. But in this case, yeah, still, it has a different. I wouldn't go too much into this, but again, you fix this and not the standardized one. And same for here. They're all one, and then you have the standard. I mean, you can have the indices after standardizing only the related variable or also standardizing the observed values. And you get different standardizations. But in this case, we focus on the unstandardized estimates. Now let's get to the interesting part, because it's not very easy to read this table, I think, because it includes both autoregressive and cross-like relationships, and cross-like including both those in which y is predicted by x and those in which x is predicted by y. So I use color coding. And also, of course, at different points in time. In this case, we have 5 different points in time. So we have that this is autoregressive effect of x. X at time 2 is predicted by x at time 1, yes. This is the p-value. This is standardized estimate, this is unstandardized estimate. But it's very close because they were probably simulated from standard normal distributions. Then we have, this is, the dependent variable is y, so we skip it for a moment. Again, x3 is predicted by x2, yes. 4 predicted by 3, yes. 5 predicted by 4, yes. You can conclude that there is an autoregressive effect of x. So there is some stability in x. If it was anxiety, would mean that beyond what is accounted for the trait, daily variation in the state level of x, or variation of, let's say, state level of x at time t, predict variation of the state level of x at time t plus 1. So meaning that if you are more anxious than your usual at time t, it's also more likely that you are more anxious than usual at the subsequent point in time. You can still have both. And also, both kind of stability.
Does it make sense? I mean, if I'm more anxious today, then I'm more anxious tomorrow, then I'm more anxious the day after, then how? I mean, this should be influence the mean?
No. Because imagine that this is your mean level, and this is my mean level. You can have a situation like this, and you can have a situation like this. You can design this type of path in the way that the mean is the same, but this is a larger autoregression, more stability over time, even though the average is the same. And this is lower stability over time. So if you are anxious today, you're less anxious tomorrow than more anxious.
More fluctuation.
More fluctuations. So it's the way in which you fluctuate around the mean. And it can be different. This is a bit tough. At the beginning was tough for me at least to understand the meaning of autoregression. But it can happen that given the same mean level, you can have different forms of fluctuations around the mean. And now, autoregressive effects on y. Does x predict y? No, autoregressive effects on y, yes. And you have it except for time 2. For some reason, it's not significantly different from 0. But typically you have it. And you have that cross-luck effects of x on y. Does x predict y at a subsequent point in time? The answer is typically yes. And does y predict x at a subsequent point in time? And the answer is typically no. Not significantly different. Yes.
Don't use the traffic when you get onto it, but like the interpretation of results is contingent on like looking at multiple p-values and going, well, most of the time, yeah, is this not you like researching pretty freedom in interpreting results?
Okay. I will briefly discuss this, but one thing that you can do. Okay. So the one problem is if you fit a model just like this, which is the simplest. Oops. One problem that you have is that you have as many cross-luck effects as time points minus 1. As many autoregressive effects as your time points minus 1, because the first one is not true. And then, yeah, is it significantly different from 0? Is it not? It's complicated.
Yeah, but this is particular to this model.
But no, you can actually solve it very easily, because you typically, unless you have something going on very fancy, you typically test whether this model, the relative fit of this model versus a model in which these, and these are constrained to be the same. And also, all autoregressive effect on x constrained to be the same. Cross-luck effect of each type, etc. And if you have reasonably stable phenomenon, you get that the constraint model fits the data better because it's much simpler. You have a single parameter for all time points. You have a better estimate of the parameter, and you have a single p-value. So that's how I practically solved the issue. That's what I did with the fluorine data.
Compared to, I don't remember the name of the model, but what American was using is the fact that it doesn't estimate every, especially if you have, 20 data points, you're not going to include the whole thing, and it's just.
There are other approaches. For example, if you, I think, dynamic structural equation modeling does it differently.
Yeah.
This is typically, these models were thought for a few equally spaced, or not necessarily equally spaced in this case, which is even is more flexible in this sense, because you can have different spaces between observations, but then you won't constrain them to be equal, the effects. And yeah, the idea is that this is mostly for a panel study, in which you have a few observations, but you can also extend it through
yeah, but with the
intensity.
I don't know, for example, I would like to come back to the issue of, taking into account the between level. Here it's not, yeah, but not. In the sense that you're taking into account into your model that you're measuring, there's some stability in X, for example, X, but it doesn't, allow you to, I don't know, if I take trait anxiety, and I want to see whether it influences, I don't know, the cross-line effect or the regressive.
You have to use dynamic structural equation modeling instead. Yes.
Because it's a different way and a more complete way to take into account between them.
Of course. Yes. Yes. You can have, with dynamic structural equation model, you can have variables at different levels. No, I don't think you can. Not easy. You can take into account other variables at the between subject level, and I'm not sure that you can, for example, moderate. You can do it with this. It's a complete other, different family of models.
It's correct to consider that if I now concentrate on these methods to be the same, it's like not assuming this functionality. Because I'm looking at different effects at different times, it's okay, it's more difficult to have.
Yes, I mean, you don't assume.
I can look at it if I'm interested in saying that something happened at that exact time point.
Yes, I mean, it's in this case, this type of stationarity, so stationarity, for example, of the cross-like paths is not assumed.
Yeah.
But then if you constrain them, you assume you're testing. You don't assume, you're testing where you're testing.
Yeah.
So it's a different approach, but yes. You don't need to assume it. And you can also adapt this different intervals in time. So in a way, it's more flexible than the SEM for this type of situations. And you have contemporaneous correlations. So in this case, X and Y, they are also correlated at the same time point. Including, I shouldn't have included in the same square because this is slightly different. This is a correlation between X and Y at the within subject level, but these are correlation of their residuals. So it makes sense that this is a different value and probably larger than these values. And the last one, you have between subject correlation, and you have it. If you look at the standardized value in this case, is a correlation of 0.59, which is quite sizable. So this was thought initially as an exercise, but we have 4 minutes and I don't think it's appropriate. But we can, the idea is, okay, let's fit a cross-like panel model, see which fits the data better, which is not that surprising. We know that the random intercept version will win because the data are simulated under the model. But it's interesting to see what happens to cross-like path if we don't account for this. So how do you go from the cross-like panel model to the from the random intercept cross-like panel model to the cross-like panel model? You remove the random intercepts, and then you remove the between-person correlation. Very easy. It's not. The rest is the same. This code is the same as the one that I showed you before, except I commented out with the hashtag symbol the random intercept and their correlations. I feed the model using the exact same syntax. I have that the random intercept cross-like panel model wins. But, okay, we don't care very much about the fit. But what we see is that now we also have a cross-like effect of Y on X that we didn't have before. Why? Because as I showed you before, if you don't account for this correlation, it will show up in the cross-like panel. Some very, very final remarks. Yes?
So I know that usually when you test the cross-like models, you need to have 4 specified models, like the autoregressive is separate, and then you have a second model when you do the positive direction, and then a third with the reverse, like Y predicts X, and then finally you do the cross-like relationships.
I see. I didn't implement it like this, but I see that you could test it as nested models, progressively more complicated, and check, for example, whether cross-like, including cross-like paths, improves the fit of the model overall, which is a different approach. Makes sense. Absolutely makes sense. So you can, you can do it.
See whether X predicts Y, whether Y predicts X, whether it's reversed or cross-like.
Absolutely. We did this, in this case, we did this by looking at whether each of the specific parameters were different from zero. That's significantly. But that's, it's different approach, between model comparison and parameter testing. But, yeah, absolutely.
I can add to this, this is one point of discussion. Sometimes there are different kind of perspectives in statistics in this. One is that you can, one is that you can't. And the reason being that when you focus on either the model or the parameters. If you focus on the parameters, one punterà, one the parameters that you estimate with an incomplete model are not the correct parameters. So always you need to have this inside, regardless of whether it's significant or not, because in this way the parameters are estimated correctly.
I see. Yes, of course.
And there is no solution. Just say that there are two different ways in which the emphasis on parameter estimate and the best parameter estimate are by partially out everything else that could happen, versus the best model, which could imply to not insert some parameters because it's a more complex. So just two different. If you can be lucky, you get the wrong review.
If you are lucky, either approach will result in the same conclusion or the other. If you are not, yeah, that's a problem. But good point. I have some final remarks. So, okay, this one very quickly. In this 2021 papers, Mulder and Amakia proposed a few extensions. So, including other between subject variables as predictor or outcomes. In this case, for example, they could predict the between subject, for example, I don't know, depression could be the predictor of both anxiety and trait anxiety and trait conditioning. You can have multiple group versions. This is very interesting. For example, you collect data in Italy and in Belgium.
Before going to the extension, I have one question. So I understand the way of comparing, for instance, the random intercept cross-lifetime model with the cross-lifetime model. But how do you compare models with inside the random intercept model? For instance, you only have one model and just check if it's fit or not fitted, or you have to constrain some cross-like relationship to zero and then compare it to models.
That was what he was suggesting, yes. Yeah. That's the idea. So you could, I never did this, but you could, for example, try to answer the question about whether is there anything going on a cross-like level. You constrain all of them to be zero, and you compare this model with a model in which they are freely estimated. And for example, if the model in which they are constrained to be zero is fitting better the data, you conclude that nothing is going on a cross-like level, nothing whatsoever. So for example, it could be the case of writing speed and typing ability. So there is nothing going on over time here, nothing interesting. Just focus on contemporary relationships. It's a good suggestion. You don't do that. Absolutely makes sense. And okay, other extension, multi-group version, like you would do in measurement invariance testing, for example. You can use it like this. For example, you have you could check whether in Italy and Belgium the relationship between anxiety and evaluative conditioning is similar or different. Maybe for Italians it's more contemporaneous, and for the Belgians it's more close-like. You can include multiple indicators, of course, of X and Y. That's quite straightforward, but it's not necessarily a single indicator. You can have as many as you want. But of course I didn't, because it would just complicate things in programming and explain. But it's not even that complicated. And you probably need at some point to estimate or to assume measurement invariance over time. So this the indicators are the same relationship with the constant component. Then other things, you can include 3 or more variables. In our case we have 6, 7, something. So you can imagine all this programming gets just multiplied a lot, but it's nothing complicated conceptually, just that you need to copy paste things and not make too many mistakes. And you can also constrain relationship to be equal at different time points. I think this is very important, because it simplifies the model hugely if you have many observations over time. And the end, I'm slightly bit long, but I began a few minutes later. So if you are interested in the debate, I put some links. These are clickable links. So for example, if you remember, the paper in which this random intercept cross-like panel model was introduced is called A Critique to the Cross-like Panel Model.